It was a Tuesday evening in October when I drove to the HOA Clubhouse for a board meeting that never happened. The sky was overcast, the leaves were turning, the air smelled like rain. I had been a resident of Cedar Ridge Estates for 8 years. I paid my dues on time, I followed the rules, I attended the meetings. I was a good neighbor. That night, the board had scheduled a meeting to discuss the annual budget. I arrived at 6:45 p.m. The parking lot was empty. I thought I was early. I sat in my car for a few minutes, checked my phone, scrolled through emails. At 6:55, I walked to the front door. It was unlocked. The lights were off. The clubhouse was empty. A note was taped to the podium. Meeting canceled. Rescheduled for next Tuesday. Board regrets any inconvenience. No explanation, no apology, just a piece of copy paper and a lie. I was annoyed. I had driven 20 minutes. I had arranged childcare. I had prepared questions, and they couldn't even bother to send an email? As I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. A door at the back of the main room, slightly ajar. A key was still in the lock. I stood there for a moment, staring at that door. I had been in this clubhouse dozens of times. I had never noticed that door before. It was in the back corner, behind the podium, half hidden by a folding screen. The key was old, brass, tarnished. It looked like it belonged in a museum, not a suburban clubhouse. I shouldn't have touched it. I know that now. But curiosity got the better of me. I walked over, I put my hand on the key, I turned it. The lock clicked, the door swung open. Behind it was not a closet, not a storage room. It was a hallway, a long, narrow hallway that wasn't on any blueprint I had ever seen. The walls were unpainted drywall, the ceiling had exposed wires, the floor was concrete. Dust motes floated in the air. It smelled like old paper and secrets. I stepped inside. The hallway was longer than I expected, maybe 30 feet. The bulb at the end flickered. The floor creaked beneath my feet. My footsteps echoed off the bare walls. Every sound seemed amplified. Every shadow seemed to move. I thought about turning back. I thought about calling someone. I thought about leaving and pretending I never saw any of it. But I couldn't. The hallway pulled me forward. I had to know where it led. At the end of the hallway, there was another door, solid wood, brass handle, no window, no sign. I paused. My hand hovered over the handle. I took a breath. I turned it. The door opened. The room was larger than I expected, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet. There was a desk, a leather executive chair, filing cabinets lining the walls, a small coffee maker, a lamp on the desk. The lamp was on. Warm light spilled across the room. Someone had been here, recently. The chair was still warm. The coffee mug had lipstick marks. A notepad had fresh handwriting. I was not alone in this building. I stepped inside. The floor was carpeted here, soft, muffled. The walls were wood-paneled, expensive. This was not a forgotten space. This was an office, a secret office, a place where someone had been meeting for a long time. I looked around. There were no windows, no signs of the outside world, just 4 walls and a door and a hallway that led to a clubhouse that no one knew had a hidden room. I opened the first filing cabinet. The drawers slid open smoothly. Inside were dozens of manila folders, each one labeled in neat handwriting. Executive session minutes, financial statements, confidential, special assessments, litigation. I pulled out a folder labeled Executive Session Confidential. I opened it. Inside were meeting minutes, pages and pages of them, dates, times, attendees, decisions. Decisions that had never been shared with residents, decisions that affected everyone in the neighborhood. I read one page, then another, then another. My hands started to shake. The meeting minutes documented years of secret gatherings, meetings that violated state law, meetings that should have been open to residents, meetings where the board made decisions behind closed doors without any oversight. I found minutes from a meeting where the board voted to raise dues. No public hearing, no resident input, no notice, just a vote among themselves. The dues went up 15% that year. No one knew why. I found minutes from a meeting where the board voted to waive fines for board members. They had been cited for violations, the same violations they fined residents for. They waived their own fines. They paid themselves back from the HOA budget. I found minutes from a meeting where the board discussed problem residents. They had a list: names, addresses, complaints. They had targeted these residents for enforcement. They had sent inspectors to their homes. They had issued fines. They had threatened liens. They had bullied people into silence. The financial records were worse. Bank statements from an account I had never seen before. Not the main HOA account, a separate account, a secret account. The statements showed deposits and withdrawals, lots of them, every month for years. I added up the numbers: 47,000 in the first year, 62,000 in the second, 89,000 in the third, over 400,000 over 5 years. Money that should have been in the HOA's main account, money that should have been used for repairs, for landscaping, for the pool, for the community. Instead, it was sitting in a secret account, controlled by the board, spent however they wanted. The checks were made out to companies I didn't recognize: Crestview Maintenance Services, Peak Property Management, Summit Consulting Group. I looked them up on my phone. None of them had websites. None of them had addresses. None of them were real. The signatures on the checks belonged to the HOA president, the same woman who stood at board meetings and talked about fiscal responsibility, the same woman who fined residents for late payments, the same woman who preached transparency. She was stealing. They were all stealing. I found more checks, dozens of them, thousands of dollars, payments for work that never happened, services that were never rendered, consultants who never consulted. Further down in the files, I found evidence of kickbacks, emails between the HOA president and a contractor. The contractor had been paid $15,000 for a landscaping project. The project never happened. The president had received a consulting fee from the contractor the same week. I found a spreadsheet. It listed every contract, every payment, every kickback. The total was staggering: over $200,000 in kickbacks over 3 years. Each board member had their own arrangement. One had a brother-in-law who overcharged for landscaping. One had a neighbor who never delivered security cameras. One had a friend who billed for snow removal that never happened. The HOA president was at the center of it all. She took the biggest cut. She signed the checks. She approved the contracts. She was the ringleader. The documents also revealed something else. The board had been targeting specific residents, people who asked questions, people who complained, people who attended meetings. They had a list. They called them troublemakers. The list included names, addresses, violations. Some were real. Most were invented. The board had sent inspectors to their homes. They had issued fines. They had threatened liens. They had bullied people into silence. One family had been fined for having a birdhouse. The birdhouse was on their back porch, not visible from the street. The fine was $500. They paid it because they were afraid. Another resident had been cited for having a trailer in his driveway. The trailer was there for one night. The fine was $1,000. He fought it. He lost. The board had a lawyer. He didn't. I recognized some of the names: the Johnsons, the Garcias, the Chens. They had all moved away. They had all sold their houses at a loss. They had been driven out by the HOA. There were copies of letters, nasty letters, threatening letters, letters that accused residents of violating community standards, letters that demanded payments, letters that threatened liens and foreclosures. I found a letter to a single mother. She had been fined for her grass being too long. Her daughter was in the hospital. She couldn't mow. She explained this. The board didn't care. They fined her anyway. She paid. She couldn't afford a lawyer. I found a letter to a disabled veteran. He had a ramp on his house. The HOA said it violated architectural standards. He had a permit. He had a doctor's note. They didn't care. They fined him anyway. He moved. I found a letter to an elderly couple. They had lived in the neighborhood since it was built. They were on a fixed income. The HOA raised their dues, then raised them again, then raised them again. They couldn't afford it. They sold. They moved to an apartment. I photographed everything, every page, every check, every email, every meeting minute. My phone's camera flashed in the dark room. The filing cabinets were empty when I finished. I had copied it all. It took me 3 hours. My hands were sore. My eyes were tired. My heart was pounding. I knew I was holding something important, something that could destroy the board, something that could change the neighborhood. I locked the door behind me. I walked back through the hallway.